seat, I think.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Walter Isaacson, and we're about to do our panel on artificial intelligence with two great speakers. But before we do, we get to do the Kent question. And the Kent question is, will artificial intelligence be a positive force for the world or a negative force? And by positive force, we mean more jobs. This being Kent, Connecticut, I think it also says more income. And would you ever consider making it, whatever you would consider leading to a more positive or the good life? So yes, no, or uncertain, start voting. And as we do so, it's my great pleasure, we're going to start this off by having John Kelly give a very short presentation. John Kelly, as you know from your program, is the Senior Vice President of IBM, handles the Watson division, among other things. And one of the cool things about Watson was not only could it win at Jeopardy, but IBM is now finding ways for it to partner with doctors and others to make the world a better place. So it's my pleasure to introduce John Kelly. Thank you.
Thanks.
Whose book, Thinking Machines, is for sale out there.
Good morning. Thank you, Walter. This is, as I mentioned in the aperitif last night, is a tremendously exciting time. We have the privilege, living at this time, to literally be at the dawn of at least a new era of computing, if not a new era for humanity. And hopefully in the next 45 minutes or so, you will conclude the same. So let me just sort of position this in a frame of both time and usage and applications of artificial intelligence. And let me just spend 2 minutes on this journey. We've been building calculating machines for roughly a century, beginning with mechanical tabulating machines, I would refer to as the first era of computing, whereby they were mechanical devices that fundamentally counted, did arithmetic, adding, subtracting, etc. In the late 1940s through the 1960s, we began to enter a second era of computing, which is commonly referred to as the programming era. The first of those systems commercially was the IBM System 360, going all the way to the phones in our pockets today. Fundamentally, we as humans told the machines every bit to move, every action to take, and the whole field of programming and computing arose through the 60s to this point today. But something is fundamentally changing in computing and in the world we live, and it is this curve. This is the amount of data that we as human beings are generating. And you see where we are today, and it basically says that there is a tsunami of data being generated and coming at us. A zettabyte, if you don't know it, if you're not the kind of geek that I am, is 10 with 21 zeros after it. So we are on the verge of creating a set of data in the world that is as large as the physical universe that we live in. Secondly, much of that data is completely unstructured. It's in natural language, it's in signals coming off devices, medical instruments, our automobiles, etc. The computers that we have built up to this point through the first two eras of computing are only good at that little blue wedge on the bottom, the very structured data that's in our bank accounts and other areas. But the computers of the past have been unable to read simple things like natural language. So we and many of the people in our industry have been after artificial intelligence computers that can deal with that wave of data, that unstructured data that's coming. Data is being generated across every industry, and the waste and the opportunity in every industry is enormous. Whether you're in oil and gas and energy, petabytes of data are being generated. Our automobiles are rolling computer systems generating data. And each one of us in our lives will generate over 1 million gigabytes of data on our personal health. 1 million gigabytes of data on our personal health. If we want to improve areas like healthcare, we need systems, artificial intelligence systems, cognitive systems that can deal with that. So we are now entering the third era of computing, the cognitive era of computing, which brings together artificial intelligence technologies in a way that can address those kinds of domains. Secondly, the interface between those kinds of computers and us as humans will change dramatically. It will no longer be through a punch card or a button. It will be a natural process of natural language and ubiquitous computer. Every place we go in the world, the system will know us and know everything about us. The first of those computers, as I mentioned last night, was this system that we demonstrated, Watson, just 5 years ago on Jeopardy, where the Watson supercomputer, artificial intelligence system, beat these two human beings that were the all-time best human beings at answering open domain question and answer in about 2 seconds per question. So the system had 1 second to understand the question, 1 second to try to figure out what the answer might be, and a half a second or 500 milliseconds to decide whether it was going to bet against these two humans. And of course, the system went on to win and win substantially against those two humans. But the thought I want to leave you with is it's not about a contest between humans and machines. It's really about the synergy between humans and machines. We know in all of our testing in every field that human plus machine will always beat a human or a machine. And it's this magic and this synergy which is absolutely critical. Lastly, the application that we are going after, as I mentioned last night, is cancer. Cancer is a plague on the world. 21 million new cases annually in the next decade or so. 2/3 of those cases will be in the emerging world. And we know that the amount of information being generated on cancer itself looks just like that curve I showed you before. Doctors can simply not keep up with the amount of discovery and information in the area of pharmaceuticals, in the area of genomics. They need artificial intelligence systems to address this. We also know that even in the developed world, such as the United States, it used to take 10 years. It now takes 7 years for a new procedure, drug, or protocol to get to half of the doctors or half of the oncologists. 7 years for just one new protocol. It takes decades for those procedures to get to Africa, India, China. So by applying artificial intelligence and a global Watson system, we can now bring the best technologies to the world. There's one for every 100 cancer patients in the US, there's an oncologist. When you go to places like India and China, it's 1 per X thousand. So we need to scale our knowledge. We've taken the opportunity, working with Memorial Sloan Kettering, as I mentioned last night, to train Watson, train an artificial intelligence system in cancer, in oncology. It took about 3.5 years for Watson to go from being a game machine to being an oncologist. The docs at Memorial Sloan Kettering tell us it was about 1 year for Watson to go through med school. It's about 1 year for Watson to become the equivalent of an oncologist fellow. And now they refer to Watson at Memorial Sloan Kettering as a trusted colleague, a trusted colleague. And that knowledge now can be brought to Africa, India, and China in seconds, So we trained, we brought it around the world to all of these hospitals, and now every day hundreds of patients are getting access to this system. We're working in areas like diabetes, which is another plague on the world, to detect early blood sugar, blood glucose issues. And finally, we're deploying it in other areas like education, self-driving automobiles, the financial services industry. We have yet to find a single industry that can't be transformed by cognitive artificial intelligence systems. And I'll conclude by saying our founder's son, T.J. Watson, Jr., back in the 60s, basically talked about computers as devices that could relieve us of our menial tasks so that we could do more creative activities. Our current chairman and CEO, Ginny Rometty, says every decision we make in 5 years will be aided by an artificial intelligence cognitive system. Hopefully that sets up a great discussion, Walter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. That was great. Really appreciate it. Thank you. So Stuart Russell has written the standard text on artificial intelligence called A Modern Approach. Tell us what's next now that John told us how we got here.
Well, I think John's presentation was very interesting. It really points to the fact that AI has come of age. There's been a long childhood for the field, but the last 20 years has seen really a sea change in the mathematical maturity of the field, and the last decade in the level of commercial investment. And I would say that we've seen more money coming into research from companies in the last 5 years than from the federal government in the entire history of the field. So those two things together are producing a really rapid rate of progress, and combine that with enormous computing power, and as John mentioned, the enormous amount of data, we will see more and more and more applications of AI. So even if there's no further technological progress within the field itself, we will still see a decade of rollout, of taking these ideas and figuring out all of the economic applications where they can make a difference.
So if these computers are going to start taking over some of these functions, as they already have,
Yep.
And we have to answer the question that we posed at the beginning, is this a force for good or a force for bad? How do we make sure our computers share our values, or perhaps even improve on our values?
So that gets to another part of John's talk, actually, the idea of the human plus machine. It's very nice to talk about a team, but if the other members of your team don't share the same values, for example, if you're on a soccer team and 5 of your 11 players are aiming at the other goal, then it doesn't work too well as a team. So you have to have what we call value alignment. We have to make sure that the objectives of machines are precisely aligned with those of the human race. And obviously that sounds almost oxymoronically ridiculous, because the human race doesn't have one objective. We don't know what it is. We're all different, and a lot of our objectives are really pretty reprehensible. So there's an enormous set of technical and social science questions about how to get this to happen. But it's essential. So in 1960, Norbert Wiener was nervous. So he, by the way, was the founder of modern control theory and automation.
He coined the term cybernetics, which is...
Yeah, so he's a very famous mathematician from MIT. And he had just seen Arthur Samuel's checker playing program. Arthur Samuel was an IBM employee at that time, using half-built IBM machines at night to run his checker playing program. Yeah. And his program learned very quickly to play better checkers than Arthur Samuel could play, and actually to play at a near professional level. So Norbert Wiener became very worried by this. He was someone who was used to looking a long way into the future. And he said, look, we're going to have this problem. If we build machines and we put objectives into them, and it's very hard to interfere with their operation after we do that, then we have to be absolutely sure that the objective we put in is precisely the one we desire. And this is almost impossible, because we don't know what it is. We don't know what our own objectives are. We don't know how the machine is going to carry out the objectives that we put in, and it will come up with solutions that we didn't expect. So anyone who's ever tried to write tax law is very familiar with this. Right? We write tax law, and then the tax lawyers figure out some amazingly complicated scheme that results in everyone except the government getting richer.
So you're sort of talking about Hal in 2001: A Space Odyssey, given a certain set of objectives, and all of a sudden follows those objectives so strongly that he ends up trying to kill everybody else. Likewise, we have Asimov's rules, which were, robots should do no harm. How would you improve on that process of giving instructions in order that a machine could have values that'll make it a good partner for us?
So maybe I'll start with an example, right? So let's just imagine in a few years' time we have a domestic robot. It's good at cleaning the house and cooking and stuff like that. And one day we're late home from work. We call up the robot and say, can you make dinner for the kids? I'm not going to be home until 8 o'clock. And the robot goes to the fridge and there's nothing there. And then it sees the cat. And it says, well, I could go down to the supermarket and do the shopping and come back and do the cooking, but I can't really leave the house because the kids are too small to be left by themselves. And so I'll just cook the cat for dinner. All right? So what you see there is that there's an element of what we call the value function of humans, the things that humans care about, our objectives, that the robot didn't understand, right? That there's sentimental value in the cat as well as nutritional value. So this is just a very small example in microcosm, but the bigger issue is that when we build systems that, for example, will be running our economy, your self-driving car that has your life in its hands, systems that will be running hospitals, systems that may be in charge of our entire military defense systems, then if you have these mistakes in the definitions of the objectives, then you have really serious consequences.
Before I get to John, I'll get right to you, but I want to just follow up quickly on that self-driving car example, because that gets to one of the great old questions of philosophy, which is the trolley car problem, which is if a trolley is about to hit 3 people, then you can pull a lever and kill a child. Do you pull that lever? I'm probably misstating it a bit. How would you, since you're probably involved in some of the concepts for self-driving cars, teach a car what to do?
Well, I would say, I mean, the trolley problems are irritating to the self-driving car designers because they really want to focus on the good parts. And they'll tell you over and over again, well, you know, even if those decisions are difficult, self-driving cars are still going to save millions of lives every year, and so leave us alone. Mm-hmm. And I think the right answer for the self-driving car designer is we leave it to the federal government to say how you...
bad.
Right, to say... no,
Second best idea, please.
Right. Do you want... Okay, so then I'll put it this way. Do you want to be in court defending your algorithm which chose to run over a small child instead of an old lady? No, you don't want to be in court defending that algorithm.
So we leave it to the trial lawyers.
You want to say, no, there's a democratically elected government that set a federally mandated standard for how those decisions are made, and our car complies with that rule. We don't want to be arguing about the merits in court. We just want to say we complied with the rule and that we did our best.
Sorry,
anyway,
John, you were about to get in.
Well, yeah, I think being careful with objectives is really important, but I think it's also important that this human plus machine, particularly in the early stages of any application of it, is really important. And I'll just tell 2 quick stories. In 1997, we built a computer called Deep Blue for chess. And we ultimately went on to beat Garry Kasparov, which was the first time a computer ever beat a grand champion at chess. And it's very interesting. I spoke with Garry after that match, and he was obviously pretty upset because he was pretty confident he was going to beat the computer. He had no idea what he was up against. But he said he struggled with it because one of the ways Garry would win was he would judge his opponent and try to determine what their psychology was for playing the game. And what we didn't even realize when we built the system, we were training it with previous grandmasters. The system had picked up multiple personalities of play, and that made it very difficult for Garry to zero in on the character of Deep Blue. Mm-hmm. Second example I will tell you is that in the case of oncology, where doctors around the world now are starting to work with cancer patients, they all tell us something very, very interesting. We always have the doctor in between the patient and the system because the system is still learning. But they all tell us something very interesting, and that is that when they have Watson on a mobile device and they're looking at a potential diagnosis, a potential treatment, they say, that's very interesting, but the real magic occurs when they turn that screen to the patient and they say, this is what Watson's saying, but you know, we need to talk about this because there are other things like the quality of your life, other side effects, things that we need to have, the 3 of us, in this decision. So this human plus machine in the decision making is very important. What is also important is Watson is learning about that interaction. What is there about quality of life, which is of value to us, that will be important in future decisions?
You just mentioned Kasparov. So after he loses the match,
yes,
what Garry does, and he writes about it quite eloquently, is do exactly what you talked about, which is a combination of humans and machines.
That's right.
And he creates a team in which humans and even a not very good machine can always beat a pure human team of grandmasters or a pure computer team.
That's right.
That synergy. So you really have 2 schools of thought, which get to our question up there. One which I would call the Ada Lovelace, Steve Jobs, Gary Kasparov, IBM school, because you've written about it in your book, Thinking Machines, which is that the partnership, the symbiosis, will always be stronger than machines alone.
That's right.
Then you have what you might call the Alan Turing singularity theory, which is at some point these machines won't need us anymore. That all those, instead of being a partner at Mount Sinai or MD Anderson or wherever the many hospitals you're doing it, the machine will soon no longer need to collaborate with it and be a trusted colleague, but will replace the doctor. Why are you so confident that machines won't just replace us someday?
Yeah, what we're seeing across the board, Walter, is that whatever field humans are in, there's sort of a normal distribution of our capability. There's people that are okay at something, there's people that are sort of average, and there's people that are exceptional. It can be people in call centers, or it can be oncologists that are sort of okay, average, or Memorial Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson caliber. What we're seeing in every single discipline, every field, is that when the machine works with people in that distribution, every one of them gets better. So the weakest call center operator that we'll talk to when we call a retailer, or doctor or oncologist, can become average. The average become as good as those at a Memorial Sloan Kettering, and the very, very best at a Sloan Kettering become even better because they can now do research and discovery they couldn't do without the machine. So I think it's not, the way this will develop, it won't be machines getting better and humans staying where they are. That combination of human plus machine, the whole distribution is going to keep shifting no matter what field we're in.
So Stuart, do you agree? You're out there with all those singularity folks out on the West Coast. Do you think machines will replace us, or do you think they'll always be our trusted colleagues?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of forecasting. I think it's a matter of steering. I think we have to ensure that it goes the way John describes.
Why?
Because the possible consequences of doing it the wrong way are terminal.
Well, it puts us out of work. Is that?
That's one thing, and I don't want to impinge on. We have a panel later on today on exactly that topic. Mm-hmm. No, in the long term, so when you have a machine that is better at making decisions than humans, and what that means, let's take Go or chess or checkers as an example, right? The machine can just consider more possibilities. It can look further into the future. It has more experience. It's played millions or billions of games, thousands of times more than any human. So you just imagine taking that board and sort of expanding it out to the whole world.
But those are rules-driven games.
But the world is driven by the rules of physics, the way people work. Machines can learn how those things operate. So it's a more complicated problem. There are clear differences between chess and Go and the whole world, but it's really a matter of degree. So we can reach a point where machines can look further ahead in the real world, where they can take into account more information, and they can make better decisions than we can. And if their objectives are not perfectly aligned with ours, then essentially we're playing a chess match against machines and we lose. Mm-hmm. And we can't say, well, we're going to team with these things, because you can't team with something that doesn't share your objectives. The systems that John is describing are not full AI systems. They are not capable of making autonomous decisions by themselves. In cases where they are, for example, the self-driving car, the human plus machine concept actually doesn't work very well. Really, when you put a human in a self-driving car, the human will be texting and watching movies, and they're not capable of taking over in situations where the machine can't do a good job. So our task is actually to come up with a way of defining AI systems that guarantees that they remain perfectly aligned with human values. Mm-hmm. And until that happens, the solution, in fact, is a little counterintuitive. We avoid putting objectives into highly intelligent machines. we insist that those machines remain uncertain about what the objective is. Their objective is to help us realize what our values and objectives are, but the machine explicitly does not know what those are. The problem arises when the machine believes absolutely that it has the objective, but it's wrong.
Okay, well, I know John has a point, but you keep saying we're going to let the machines learn what our values are. Let's take an odious example, which is this presidential election. How would you teach a machine how to make that choice? Would you let it watch all 3 cable networks? What?
So the information from which a machine can learn human values is in fact the choices that humans make. Right? This is how we reveal our preferences, even the ones that we're not consciously aware of and we couldn't write down. Clearly we make mistakes, clearly we're weak-willed, clearly we're heterogeneous. Different people have different value systems. But the amount of information, everything that's ever been written down, go back to 7,000 BC when people were writing down, I'd trade you 3 bushels of corn for 5 cows and a slave, or whatever it was, right? That tells you something about the human value system even there. Mm-hmm. Novels, television programs, newspaper articles, everything is about humans doing stuff and other people getting annoyed about it. So there's a massive amount of information. And so what I'm going to be doing for the next 20 years is figuring out how to mine that information and construct these value systems that will allow machines to be robust and beneficial.
So if you're successful, we will end up with more presidential elections like the one we have, because the machines will not be better at it than we are.
They could be a lot better, actually.
Okay. They'll have better values?
Yes, in a sense, they could. So in some sense, they can show us what our best selves are. Because they can see the effects of what we might call defective value systems, because what a defective value system is one that ends up negatively affecting the values of other people. So they can see all those trade-offs. They can see where things went wrong. And in some sense, they can show us what we really believe we should be doing.
But have you just given the machine an instruction rather than learning by saying a defective value is something that negatively affects other people? Is that an objective thing to tell a machine?
So that's a really good question. And this is something that the AI community really needs help from the social sciences. So social scientists, political scientists, sociologists, and economists have studied these questions for centuries. How do we figure out, basically, how do we get along? Right? Given that each of us, given our druthers, would, we'd be, as it were, king of the world. We can't all be king of the world, and so how do we manage? We have laws, we have conventions, we have social constraints on our behavior. We have all kinds of methods designed to resolve those kinds of conflicts. Mm-hmm. And so we may need to figure out how to extend that whole set of concepts to a system consisting of billions of humans and billions of AI systems.
John, let's get back to the present, if we could. We've talked about oncology. Let's talk about another field where you would have thought intelligent machines or machine learnings would have really had a huge impact, and that's K through 12 education. But if Ben Franklin, who created the Academy for the Education of Youth near here, walked into a classroom today, he'd say, whoa, exactly what 24 desks, a blackboard, a teacher lecturing. A, what could computers do to improve our education system? And B, why hasn't it happened much yet despite a decade of people talking about MOOCs?
Yeah, that's a great question, Walter. I think education might be, beyond healthcare, the next big industry, if you will, enterprise that can change, because it hasn't changed since Ben Franklin. We're still pulling children together, by and large, and teaching to the average, and then trying to assist those that are on one end of the distribution or the other. What's changed now is, versus what we've done in the past couple of decades, it's no longer about just a PC or a computer for every child. We're now at the point with MOOCs and other online dynamic education where we're not only electronically bringing content or connecting students, we can actually, through the machine the other way, watch how the student learns. So now, once you understand that a certain student is struggling with this part of language or this part of math or some other concept in chemistry or something, the machine can figure out, based on that child's performance over a number of tests, this is the better way now to teach that student and dynamically adjust the content, the courseware, and the way of teaching. Certain students might be more visual learners. The system can automatically, dynamically bring content that will optimize that student's learning. So in a sense, the analogy to healthcare is healthcare by and large was treating averages, and we've learned that fields like cancer now are not just overall cancer or cancer of a certain organ. It's very individual to that tumor. The same with the students. Every student learns differently at different points in time. So if we can do truly personalized learning, I think we can really change.
Give me an example.
So
What does IBM have that I should put in our class?
So we decided that we're going to start with pre-K. It's well known that the way the brain develops, that most of the growth occurs in the 2 to 5 year old range. Much of the fundamentals of our learning occur at that point in time. It's also known that the tightest correlation between anything about an early child and ultimately their capacity is in how many words they know when they're about 2 or 3 years old. The larger the vocabulary, statistically, there's a huge correlation to the ultimate capability of the person. So we decided to partner with Sesame Street because they have enormous content for young children. And we are now developing tools with Sesame Street to watch the child learn, and then based on Sesame's enormous content for early childhood education, dynamically through Watson, bring that right to not only the student, but the teacher and the parent, so they can dynamically adjust and optimize something simple like the vocabulary of an early 2-year-old. And we believe that's going to have make a substantial difference.
Getting back to the question of is it going to make us better or worse, we all thought 10 years ago that what you described would help bridge the inequality gap, would help kids from different zip codes have a more equal opportunity. It's been the exact opposite so far. How do you fix that?
Yeah, I think we had a simple-minded view, Walter, which was if we just put a laptop or a computer with every student, no student left behind, give them a computer, that was somehow going to fix the problem. It was giving them a piece of technology. It wasn't fundamentally altering the education system. It would be the same as putting a mobile device in the hand of a doctor. You're not going to fundamentally change healthcare if you can't bring information that can be acted upon right at that point in time when either learning is occurring or a diagnosis is occurring. So what's really changed now is we have the capability to do these things in real time at real speed because of the network and the computing and AI capability. And these machines, remember, they're constantly learning. We go from one patient to the next, the machine is smarter. We go from one student to the next, it's smarter. And these machines never forget.
So, Stuart, I'm actually kind of rooting here that we can make people more optimistic when they re-vote on the question, tell me how machine learning or artificial intelligence is going to make things better for me in the next 5 or 6 years or 10 years.
So I think one of the big steps that's already happening is in the area of personal assistance. So we're already familiar with Siri and Cortana and Alexa. These are not really personal assistants. In some sense, they're a glorified query box to a search engine. But they demonstrate that the speech recognition capability has reached a point where it's practically useful. And this will also have a huge impact on education. Coming back to that previous point, one of the big reasons why computers haven't made a difference is because you can't speak to them. And they don't, even if you could, they wouldn't understand what you were saying, and they don't understand the material that they're trying to teach. So there's a lot of work that needs still to be done to get education to be really impacted. I think in the next 5 years or so, we will reach a point where the ability of machines to understand language, the actual content of all of your emails, all of your phone conversations and your texts will be enough that the machine will know about your life. They will understand who you are, what you're doing, who you care about, what your plans are, who you like, who you don't like. And they'll be like a really good executive assistant, but they'll be 99 cents a month.
And,
And,
so therefore, executive
that will-
assistants will be out of work, but yeah.
So, but there are very few professional executive assistants
Right.
compared, I think there are billions of people who really could benefit from that. People who, have 2 jobs and 5 kids and so on. They need someone to help manage their lives, to pay the bills and deal with.
And just so I can
all
give
the
equal time
complications
to
of
the
life.
pessimists in this room who are rooting for a no vote, what should I worry about when that happens in terms of a personal assistant knowing everything about me and being able to run my life?
So you certainly want that to adjust to your values, your type of politeness. When you say someone writes you, says, "Can you come and give a speech at this meeting?" and you want to be polite, or you want to blow them off, or just ignore it, or accept because you're just a good guy and you love flying around
And
the
is
world.
Ben Rosen or Donna asking
Right.
you? Yeah.
You certainly don't want it to respond when someone says, "Can you tell me Walter's password?" Right? So it needs to, and if you say to your personal assistant, "Can you buy me 6 pairs of socks?" Right? You don't want it to spend $500 a pair on socks. So, but you might be willing to spend more than 50 cents a pair. So it needs to understand a lot of things in order to be a good assistant for you.
Yeah, I think I think about 2 sort of time frames, Walter. One is the sort of the now and the near future, and what these systems will help us do is make better decisions. We know in healthcare and in almost every industry that we as humans, a third of the time, just make wrong decisions, where there is a right and a wrong answer, a misdiagnosis versus a proper diagnosis. I think the first task of these systems is to help us clean up those bad decisions. And we know we can do that with these kinds of systems. Because we as humans either don't have all the information or we develop tremendous biases. As a doctor, if I've seen 20 of something, the 21st patient comes in, I'm likely to diagnose that preferentially. That's well studied.
So the machine helps us.
So the machine will help us clean up a third, of all the decisions we make. The second phase, to me, is the really exciting, which is, okay, what really is the sort of the killer app for AI and machines? I personally think it's discovery, because now we've sort of cleaned up the mess and the decisions we've made. Now, how can we really discover new things? I'll give you just one example where we've worked, again, I keep using healthcare, I'm sorry, we're most advanced in that, with Baylor University School of Medicine researchers. There's a particular gene, P54, that we all have, which controls the growth of cells in our body and is often tightly correlated with cancer. It's a gene that turns on and turns off, simply put, our cell multiplication. That is a highly targeted gene for the pharmaceutical companies to stop cancer. That gene has been studied by humans now for decades. On average, we as humans find one new pathway towards that gene, one possibility per year, all the drug companies, to go after cancer through that gene. We, with Baylor University, put Watson to work on that, and in 3.5 weeks found 7 new pathways that could potentially affect that gene and cancer. Because Watson has read all of the medical journals, has studied at Sloan Kettering, knows everything we know. It knows the edges of our knowledge, and it can tell us, look here, we haven't studied here yet. Or I have found these correlations, look at that pathway. It doesn't know what to do with it, but it can tell us, let's go discover it together in that area.
Let me pick up on something Stuart said and turn it to you, which is voice recognition, which is obviously something that Watson did rather well, including cognitive understanding of the voice. The history of human-computer interface has really been a history of making that interface almost disappear. Right. And, Steve Jobs, with a little bit of help from Xerox PARC, makes it so you have a trash can instead of a command line. How fundamental will be the change when we can walk into any room and say to any thermostat or any chair or any device, here's what I want to do?
I believe it's going to fundamentally change the equation. I think that's sort of the final barrier for this human-machine interface. We started in that history I showed you with mechanical switches. We went to punch cards, we went to keyboards, and then you remember to reboot a machine, we created the control, alternate, delete.
Why in the world did you need all three keys? Was it Bill Gates' fault or IBM's fault?
It's ours.
Your fault? It was a hardware problem? Okay.
But then, and to simplify, to Steve Jobs' credit, he told his engineering team, I only want one button on that phone, period.
Yeah.
Everything else is on the screen.
Same with the iPod.
But really, we as humans, voice is really, voice recognition, which Watson does extremely well. By the way, Watson now is in 8 languages, and it doesn't translate. It thinks in Japanese. It thinks in Portuguese.
Wow.
It thinks in Chinese. It takes that language and statistically understands the language and what's being said.
Now, that's your colleague J.D. Searle. Is he the one who does the Chinese room experiment to try to figure out, can it really think in Chinese? Yeah.
Well, I think we're using would. There are quote marks around the word think in all of these discussions.
Let me open it up, if I may, because we only have about 10, 12 minutes left. If we could turn on some lights, raise some hands, run some microphones. I guess we can't do any of that, okay? I see a hand there, and at some point there'll be a mic. Oh, just shout it out, and I'll repeat. Yes, sir.
So, if very brilliant people can go rogue, in the future, what's to stop very brilliant next future generations of AI from going rogue?
All right, that's your field, Stuart.
Yeah. So, what I'm working on is essentially to create design templates for provably safe machines. And the thing I mentioned earlier, the fact that the machine is uncertain about the objective is a crucial point. So one of the things that people have worried about is the fact that for almost any goal you give a machine, something as simple as fetch the coffee, the machine, in order to fetch the coffee, needs to stay alive, right? Because you can't get the coffee if you're dead. Therefore, the machine will necessarily preserve its own existence against outside threats if you give it a goal as simple as fetch the coffee. So you don't program in self-preservation at all. It's just a logical consequence of having an objective. Now, so that means that machines will automatically disable their own off switch if they have that option. So you can immediately see that there's sort of a problematic dynamic developing with smart machines that are given objectives. And it turns out that if you insist that the machine is uncertain about what the objective is, then it understands that that it might get switched off by the human because it's doing something the human doesn't like. It understands that what it is doing is not necessarily consistent with the human's objective. And therefore, it has an incentive to allow itself to be switched off because that is a better outcome for a machine whose goal it is to make humans happy. Okay? So just in that little example, that can be turned into a mathematical theorem, and you can prove that design template, a machine that explicitly has uncertainty about what its objective is, which is to help the human, will allow itself to be switched off, whereas a machine that is certain about what the objective is will not allow itself to be switched off. Okay, so we can then gradually elaborate on these design templates. Now, the problem of going rogue remains actually with the human. So even if we have these provably safe design templates, the problem is humans who decide to circumvent them and misuse AI systems to achieve their own objectives. And I think this is a very serious problem. It's similar to the one we have with nuclear weapons, right? There's a reason why, despite the NRA, you can't go down to your local store and buy a nuclear weapon. And we have tens of thousands of people whose full-time occupation is to prevent nuclear weapons from falling into the hands of the wrong people. We have all kinds of treaties and laws and machinery to try to prevent these things from happening. So it may be that in the future, and I'm definitely not arguing right now for regulation, but in the future, when we have a better handle on what exactly the issues are, we may see that we need this kind of regulation in order to make sure that only provably safe systems are produced and connected to the internet, and that they can't be tampered with in certain ways.
Let me give you a real-life example and ask you to address it, which is a few weeks ago. I was at Creech Air Force Base, which is where the drones that are fighting in Syria are controlled. And they're controlled a lot by machines, and they can even do, thanks to IBM, facial recognition, follow somebody on a motorcycle, see a kid, decide whether or not to shoot a Hellfire missile and blow up that place. At the moment, a human is always in the loop, meaning nobody can be killed without a human pushing a button, to oversimplify. Is that the way we have to always keep it?
In my view, yes. So I know Arati Prabhakar is going to be speaking later, the director of DARPA. She may have something to say about this. But here's the thing, right? If you create a weapon that can select and attack its own targets, then you decouple the number of weapons you can deploy from the number of humans you need to deploy them. Mm-hmm. And so you create what we call scalable weapon of mass destruction, where 5 guys with a truck can launch 10 million weapons against a city. And, for example, wipe out all males between the age of 16 and 60. Do we want to create that kind of technology? Do we want to have an arms marketplace where anyone who has enough money can go buy 50 million micro UAVs? They only have to be an inch wide. Mm-hmm. They can weigh 10 grams, they can carry a 2-gram payload and kill something.
UAV being an unmanned autonomous vehicle?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So, you can go down to a toy store now, you can buy a 1-inch diameter quadcopter. You can put a 2-gram shape charge on that thing and blow a hole in someone's head.
You're not helping the yes votes in this thing.
Let me try.
Okay, John, help us out.
This is a very real issue. It's being discussed right now, in the White House, in the United Nations. It's a very serious problem, and I think we need to do something.
Let me take a little cut at it in a little bit different way. Remember, these machines, Watson, it's dumb as a piece of silicon or a piece of metal. It only learns based on the data that it receives. So if I segue back to the last discussion up here on cybersecurity, the way you hack into a system today is you get into the program. You put a piece of code into that program, and you force the machine to do something that you want that machine to do, whether it's take data out, shut the machine down, whatever. These cognitive AI systems, you don't go into the program. You'll shut the machine out if you do it. You basically give it new data that's corrupted. You try to
That's
teach
how
it.
you that's how you destroy it.
You hack it by trying to teach it something that's wrong or bad. So what are the techniques then to stop that? Well, you need the machine then, the AI system, to learn you could teach it ground truth, but the trouble is you run out of ways to tell it what not to do. So you need the machine to be constantly checking. So in the case of a medical diagnosis, as an example, if someone were going to try to corrupt the machine and teach it, well, give it this drug, then you want the machine constantly checking, is that a fatal drug? Does that drug have side effects? How often has that been prescribed? Wait a minute, I've never seen this happen before, don't do that. Mm-hmm. So you want the system to be constructed in a way that it's always statistically checking for side effects.
And it learns from watching human behave.
That's right.
And it creates an algorithm out of that.
And it creates a learning algorithm that says, this is too abnormal.
And could that learning algorithm be racist?
It can, well, first of all, the system is purely statistical. So it starts fresh.
But if it's learning from what humans decide.
It will learn, but it will constantly be checking against other things.
David has the microphone. Grab him. Okay.
So let's
Whoops.
on that statement.
Wave your hand so I can see. Oh,
If the computer system is looking at data and analyzing statistically, if there historically has been racial profiling, that will appear as statistically interesting data. So how does it know that interesting statistical data, occurrences, racial profiling, isn't a bad thing versus a good thing?
It will be looking at other sources of data that were actually discussed yesterday in that racial panel, which says statistically it doesn't impact other things. It is not a fundamental of why crime occurs. So it will be constantly looking at other things to determine whether this potential bias is real or not. So it's very important that the system have enough information and enough data to look at the problem in many different dimensions to conclude, wait a minute, that's a bias that's starting to occur.
David, you want to pick up? Okay, yes, sir.
Taking that one step further, how do you prevent somebody from building a machine which generates the bias for the input to other machines? That is, it statistically warps by generating 12 billion adverse consequences that the other machines then say, we can't do that.
That's your job, Stuart.
I mean, yes, that is a way you can corrupt a simple machine learning system. My personal view is that although deep learning techniques, which is the current rage, simply shoving big data into an enormous statistical network that estimates all kinds of parameters from the raw data, my view is that that approach is actually not, not in the long run going to be the way we achieve AI. And you might take another example, right? If you look at the Large Hadron Collider, that generates 50 terabytes of data per second. If you just shoved all that into a deep learning network that knows nothing about physics whatsoever, nothing is going to happen. It is not going to discover that there's a Higgs boson, right? Any more than a janitor would look at bubble chamber photographs and be able to figure out the physics. They would just think it's like Jackson Pollock paintings, right? That's what they look like. So in order to understand data, you need to understand about something. You have to have knowledge about the mechanism of data generation. So if you want to understand data from the Large Hadron Collider, you need to understand most of the physics underlying it. If you want to understand data generated from credit card applications, then it helps to understand about the history of redlining and how that affected the kinds of data that you're going to see. So I think simple machine learning systems are vulnerable in exactly the way that you describe. But more sophisticated systems have knowledge that can be interrogated and checked. They can be built with enough understanding of how the data coming in is generated that they can avoid being fooled.
All right, as we vote, I'm going to let John give the final word, but while he's talking and maybe influencing you for 10 seconds, sorry. One more question. I'm wrong. I'm getting the flashing light. It's like a machine telling me to stop, a human telling me to go. I'll go with the you.
Let's assume Watson is really successful, and tomorrow we learn that life expectancy has gone up by 15 years as a consequence of extraordinary things that Watson and doctors can do. Do we have society doesn't have the capacity to cope with the ramifications of such important changes? Or do you believe, or are you worrying about that kind of issue? The capacity suddenly, everybody's living 15 years longer and pension systems are suddenly completely unviable and people are, all the social and economic ramifications of some of the things that might develop.
And we'll let that be the final question because the machine is blinking at me, but I'll let both of you talk about the unintended consequences in general of good things.
Well, I think that is a great way to tee up the summary here. And I'm constantly asked, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And I have come down, personally, and we as a company have come down to believe that the consequences, the cost in the medical system, healthcare is an $8 trillion industry. $2 trillion of that is waste by bad decisions. The cost in human lives, the cost to our financial systems of a healthcare system with bad decision making far outweighs, in our minds, all of the risks and sci-fi stuff that we talked about. So from our perspective, the cost of bad decisions must be addressed by these systems. And this is the only way that we know of to take those kinds of bad decisions and turn them. There are lots of societal implications, lots of things that need to be discussed about this, like any technology that has come before. But this is the first time we as humanity have a chance to really make fundamentally bad decisions good and to scale our knowledge globally instantaneously.
As we all vote on will artificial intelligence be a positive force for the world, let Stuart end either with that big question or with the question of how would you teach a Watson who's helping with healthcare to factor in other things simply than just extending life indefinitely.
So if you think about our civilization, I mean, you can see some of it here, but you've seen much of our civilization. It all comes from our intellect. It doesn't come from our big, scary claws or teeth or any of those things. It comes from our intellect. And what's happening now is that we will be able to magnify our intellect dramatically. So that I've described in the past this as the biggest event in human history. Now, however you describe it, it has to be a break in the course of history. And the upside potential is essentially unlimited. We could reach a situation where we no longer are driven by conflict over resources, by stupidity. We could actually decide how we want our society to be and have the means to put that into effect.
Let's see how the vote turned out, and let's thank Stuart and John. The votes. Yes. Wow. We ended up saying yes. Well, it's good to be in a room of optimists, especially techno-optimists. Thank you, John. Thank you, Stuart. And on to our next panel.